In the summer of 1991, a Soviet official steps up at a gold conference in the West and says a number out loud: 374.5 tons. For most countries, that would be a routine statistic. For the Soviet Union, it's a flare fired into the night sky. Because Soviet gold wasn't supposed to be discussed, not in public, not with foreigners listening. Gold reserves were a state secret, wrapped in another secret, the kind of figure that lived in safes and whispered memos. And now, suddenly, the Kremlin is letting the world see a gauge on its dashboard. The traders and bankers hear it the same way a doctor hears a heartbeat go faint, not as information, but as warning. And if you follow what happens next, how that gold was used, where it went, what it paid for, and what vanished alongside it, you run straight into one of the darkest questions of the Soviet collapse. When the system died, who got paid? Start with the scene most people miss. Not a protest, not a parliament, but a payments desk. Somewhere inside the Soviet foreign payments machinery, inside the institutions that handled hard currency, imports, and debt, an ordinary official looks at invoices that don't care about ideology. Grain shipments, medicine, machinery, interest due on loans, bills from foreign suppliers who have learned the hard way that a superpower can still be broke. On paper, the Soviet Union is a nuclear titan. In reality, it is short of cash. Hard currency, dollars, Deutschmarks, Swiss francs, is the oxygen of international trade. And by 1990 and 1991, the Soviet state is gasping for it. Oil revenues have weakened compared to the boom years. Imports are rising. The government has borrowed. Arrears are piling up like snowdrifts. A planned economy can hide shortages inside the country for years. It cannot hide them from foreign creditors. So the payments desk turns into a triage unit. Which shipments do we pay for this week? Which debts do we roll over? Which promises do we break? And when you run out of everything else, you reach for the asset that lenders everywhere understand: gold. This is where the phrase Politburo's secret gold reserves becomes more than a metaphor. The Soviet Union had two overlapping worlds of value. The first is the state gold, official reserves tied to the central bank and the state depository system, accumulated over decades, fed by domestic mining, and guarded like a military plan. The second is what people later called party gold, which often wasn't gold at all, more a web of hard currency funds, property, accounts, and foreign channels controlled by the Communist Party apparatus. They blurred together in the public imagination because both were secretive, both sat beyond normal oversight, and both became politically radioactive when the Soviet order began to crack. But to understand who got paid, you have to separate them. Let's talk about the state gold first. The USSR was one of the world's major gold producers. Much of that gold flowed into state hands. Some sat as reserves. Some was sold on Western markets for hard currency, especially when export earnings weren't enough. By the late 1980s and into 1991, those sales accelerate. International financial institutions later described heavy gold sales from both current production and reserves in the years 1989 to 1991. Sales so intense they effectively drained what was counted as official reserves. That's the first twist. By the time the Soviet Union is collapsing in the streets, it has already been collapsing on spreadsheets. And then the public numbers start leaking out in fragments. In June 1991, that 374.5-ton figure is cited for official reserves. A few months later, reports circulate that reserves may be even lower, around 240 tons by autumn 1991. At the same time, analysts argue over whether there is more gold hidden elsewhere, outside what the central bank labels as official holdings. Some believe the true total could be much higher. Others suspect wishful thinking, people wanting to believe a secret hoard exists because the alternative is terrifying. The empire is nearly out of hard assets. That debate matters because, in a crisis, belief becomes a policy variable. If leaders think there's more in the vaults, they delay hard decisions. If they know the vault is empty, they panic. Now tighten the timeline. August 1991. The coup attempt erupts and fails. Power shifts violently toward Boris Yeltsin in the Russian Republic, while Mikhail Gorbachev's Union government goes hollow. The Communist Party's authority, a pillar holding up the entire structure, suddenly looks like a criminal liability. And within days, the party itself begins to lose control of its buildings, its archives, and its property base in Russia. Yeltsin issues decrees moving to suspend and then ban party activity on Russian territory and to seize party assets. Later, these actions become the subject of a high-profile legal and constitutional struggle. But in a collapsing state, legal battles come after physical access. Whoever holds the keys holds the truth. And this is where who got paid becomes a story of two pipelines. Pipeline 1, the official state pipeline. If the Soviet government sells gold on Western markets, who benefits immediately? Not Soviet citizens standing in empty shops, not pensioners watching savings dissolve. The immediate beneficiaries are foreign counterparties, grain exporters, medicine suppliers, shipping firms, and banks waiting for interest payments. This isn't a moral judgment, it's the mechanics of insolvency. When you are close to default, every bar you sell becomes a decision about survival. You sell gold to keep imports moving. You sell gold to buy time. You sell gold because a missed payment can freeze credit lines and stop food shipments cold. By November and December 1991, reports describe the Soviet external payment situation as desperate. The foreign trade bank and the state's hard currency reserves are dwindling to sums that sound absurd for a superpower. Tens of millions of dollars, not billions, tens of millions. This is the part that hits like a punch. An empire with intercontinental missiles is counting out millions like a small, broke country. And so the first answer to who got paid is brutally straightforward. Western creditors and foreign suppliers got paid first, when they got paid at all. Gold became a shovel used to clear the immediate path. That service here, arrears there, a vital import that couldn't wait. But that's only half the story, because the second pipeline is the one that caused the rumors to metastasize. Pipeline 2, the party-state pipeline. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union wasn't just a political organization. It was a parallel administrative empire, with its own cash flows, its own assets, and in some domains, its own international relationships. It controlled vast domestic property, buildings, publishing houses, hotels, educational institutions, often supported by state resources. It also handled sensitive streams of funds, including financial support to foreign communist parties and movements during the Cold War. When the Soviet state starts to unravel and when party leaders realize a ban or seizure is possible, the incentive flips. If your entire world is about control, then collapse doesn't produce resignation. It produces liquidation. You do not need a Hollywood conspiracy for this to happen. You only need 3 ingredients. A sudden loosening of controls in the late Soviet period, the creation of joint ventures and new banking structures with partial foreign links, and the knowledge, inside the apparatus, that tomorrow's political order might criminalize today's privileges. That's when money changes shape. It becomes deposits. It becomes stakes in newly formed commercial entities. It becomes transfers routed through places where paperwork is harder to subpoena. It becomes, in effect, an escape pod. This is how the legend of party gold is born, and it is why the legend survives. Because parts of it are plausible, parts of it were investigated, and parts of it remain permanently unprovable in public. The mini reveal here is that even before the formal dissolution of the USSR, the financial landscape was already shifting. In October 1989, International Moscow Bank is created with foreign participation, capitalized using hard currency resources connected to the Soviet foreign economic banking system. That's not stolen gold in the cinematic sense, but it is a sign of an elite preparing for a world in which old channels might fail and new ones might be safer. And then, as the Soviet Union collapses, strange deaths and panicked decisions add fuel to speculation. In late August 1991, Nikolai Khrushchev, the administrator of affairs of the CPSU Central Committee, often described as a key figure in managing party property and finances, dies after falling from a window. His predecessor, Georgy Pavlov, dies the same way in October. Another senior party official, Dmitry Lisovolik, also dies in October after a fall from a window. The official accounts treat these as suicides. Whatever the truth, the timing is terrible. It creates a vacuum at precisely the moment everyone is asking, where are the party's assets? The public hears gold and imagines pallets of bars, but in many accounts, party gold is shorthand for hard currency and movable financial assets presumed to have been shifted abroad through party and security service channels. Now the investigation begins, at least the attempt. In March 1992, the Russian government hires the investigations firm Kroll to help trace what was estimated at the time to be up to $14 billion in hard currency that may have been moved out of the country illicitly. That hiring itself is a plot twist. A new state, still barely functional, turning to private investigators because its own institutions can't see their own money trails. It also tells you something chilling. The new authorities believed the outflow was large enough to matter to national survival. This wasn't gossip about a few suitcases. It was a search for sums that could stabilize a collapsing economy, if they existed and if they could be recovered. But tracing money is not like tracing gold bars. Money travels through contracts, shells, intermediaries, correspondent accounts, and legal jurisdictions designed to slow down outsiders. And in the early 1990s, Russia's own governance was chaotic. Agencies reorganizing, competing, sometimes obstructing each other, sometimes compromised. This is where the story stops being a clean mystery with a satisfying solution and becomes the kind of mystery history often gives you. Fragments, allegations, partial confirmations, and long shadows. So who got paid in the second pipeline? Here, the honest answer is less certain but more revealing. Some people inside the collapsing Soviet and early Russian apparatus did get paid by converting administrative power into private advantage during the transition. That doesn't require a single master plan. It can happen through thousands of small acts, preferential access to foreign currency, insider stakes in new banks and ventures, sweetheart privatizations later, asset stripping, and the use of foreign accounts as a safety deposit box for uncertain times. What the party gold narrative captures, sometimes clumsily, is the deeper truth that the collapse did not distribute pain evenly. Those closest to hard currency, to banks, to external trade, and to the right signatures had options that ordinary citizens did not. And while investigators chase funds abroad, the ordinary Soviet person experienced the collapse as a brutal inversion of priorities. The state can find gold to pay foreign creditors, but cannot keep shelves stocked. It can negotiate with the London Club and foreign banks, but cannot guarantee wages. It can settle arrears on paper, but cannot stop savings from being destroyed by inflation and currency breakdown. Which leads to the third twist. Even the act of paying becomes political theater. In late 1991, debts and assets are still Soviet, but the Soviet Union is dissolving into 15 successor states. Who owns the gold reserve? Who is responsible for the foreign debt? Who gets the external assets? These questions are fought over in treaties and negotiations, but in the interim, there's a deadly gap, an ownership vacuum where assets can be frozen, seized, or quietly moved. This is how you get a situation where everyone claims they're the rightful heir to the vault, while the vault is already being emptied to pay yesterday's bills. And here is the quiet moral of the entire story. When systems collapse, money does not disappear first. Accountability disappears first. So if you want the cleanest accounting of who got paid, picture 3 concentric circles. The outer circle is foreign, creditors, suppliers, and counterparties who received gold-funded payments when the Soviet state could still push value across borders. The middle circle is domestic but elite, institutions and individuals with access to hard currency channels, early banking structures, and the authority to transform administrative control into ownership or offshore safety. And the inner circle, the largest circle, is everyone else. Workers, pensioners, and households who did not get paid in gold or dollars, but in collapsing rubles, delayed wages, and the promise that tomorrow would stabilize. That's what makes the secret gold so haunting. Not because it proves a single theft, but because it shows a nation in its last months behaving like a bankrupt corporation, selling its last liquid assets to keep the lights on, while parts of its political class behave like people who already know the lights are going out and are dividing up the candles. So what happened to the Politburo's secret gold? Some of it became hard currency that went straight out the door to service external obligations and pay for life support imports. Some of it was never as large as people hoped because the official reserves had been drained by years of sales and crisis management. Some of it may have existed in forms the public didn't understand: industrial diamonds, precious metals, foreign balances, and state property.
And some of it, this is the key word, was alleged to have been moved through party-linked and security-linked channels into structures that survived the USSR, even as the USSR itself did not. Those allegations drove investigations. They produced headlines. They produced partial results and endless suspicion. The system died in December 1991, but the money trails didn't die. They just moved into a world where power and profit could finally share the same room without pretending otherwise. And that's the ending you're left with. In an empire built on planned certainty, the final months were ruled by improvisation. When the Soviet state ran out of credibility, it spent gold. When the party ran out of legal cover, it looked for hiding places.
In the end, the most Soviet part of the story is not that someone may have stolen. It's that the most valuable asset wasn't the gold. It was access. Because when the system died, gold didn't go to the people standing in line. It went to whoever could still write the orders.